refactoring the previous assignment to be able to retrieve some of the data from the server as opposed to from the mock data that we are hosting on the client side web services. Let's see how much did we get. Oops, it's not running. Let me start the server. Let's see. We were in the assignments for the undergrads, for the index, and I believe we worked on the login, right? We got this to work, and if we look at the network traffic, when we try to log in here as Bob and Bob, the client service is going out to the server. It's posting username and password. Right here, this is sending the username and password as a get. At some point, we're going to change this to a post. It's a much better solution, but for now, we're going to keep it as a get, and it's passing the username and password as part of the URL. Later on, we're going to change this so that it's not a good practice to send a password or any compromising information on the clear as part of the URL. But later on, we'll fix that when we talk about security. We see that the server responded with that they did find a user with that username and password, and in a follow-up query, we send another query asking for the information about that particular user, using their ID. So basically, two finder methods that used to live on the client side, we have moved them over to the server, right? And just a quick overview of that. We implemented that in this user side, on this server side web service by defining these two endpoints, right? An endpoint that can we can post username and password to find them by credentials. Another one where we can post it by a specific user ID and retrieve that particular user. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. So let's keep going. Let's move on to being able to, for instance, create a new user or update an existing user. Okay. So let's do that. We would do that if we are registering. Okay. If we want to create a new user, we would post this new user to the server, and the server would then add that user to the existing collection of users. Okay. So let's work on that. Right. So in the register controller, so this is the register page, the register template. If we look at the view for that, we go down to the views for the user for the register. There it is. This is the register page, right? And when we click on register, notice that it's invoking the register function on the model, meaning the controller, which is implemented in the controller here, in the register controller, which we have right down here, right? Implement right here, which is implemented over here. It checks to see if the passwords match. It finds a user by username. Let's skip this for now. Okay, we'll do that a little later. Right, for now, I'm just going to say that this is null, meaning it didn't find the user. I'm going to use a user that doesn't exist. We'll try Dan or Fred or Andrew or something else. And then if it's different than null, let's see. If it's null, meaning we didn't find a user, it then calls this user service.create. Okay. The old implementation of this create user is to probably add it or push it to an array that already exists on the service. So if we look at the service, the user service is over here, and the create, there it is, right? It adds a dummy ID for the user, and it just pushes it onto the array. Make sense? All right. So let's see if we can move this over to the server side. Okay. All right. So let's start off with create user, the service side, the client side of this service, and what we want to be able to do is we have the user object, right? We have a user object that's being passed to us, and we just want to take that user and just send it over to the server, right? The way we're going to do that is using the same kind of URL mechanism that we're using earlier to find users. We're going to use the HTTP service, but instead of a GET, we're going to use a POST. Okay, again, following the RESTful convention, we're going to use the GET to be able to read for read-only operations from the server. We're going to use POST for sending brand new data to the server, or PUT to manipulate data that is already on the server, and delete for removal. Okay, that's the convention in RESTful APIs, right? So let's do that. So in the create, we're going to use $http.post, and we're going to send over to the following URL. The URL will be API / and then what's the naming convention? I think API assignment, right? The API that we're using here is again a convention that we can all agree that it's namespacing these URLs, right, to distinguish these GET or these POSTs or these HTTP requests, distinguish them from requests inside of the public directory. Okay, notice that as we navigate, right, we say assignment, undergraduate, and whatnot, right? These are URL. These are GET operations that go to the server, correct? Right, and they are all being mapped to a directory under the public directory, correct? Right? These URLs that we're sending with these GETs, right? These GETs operations, API, assignment, whatnot, they could be confused with static content that is under the public directory, correct? Right? And that's exactly what Express does. It looks for actual file that is under a directory API. It doesn't find it. It says, oh, there is no API directory. Okay, so it must not be an actual file under the public directory. So instead, it starts looking to other routes that might be declared. And indeed, we did declare a couple of those, right? So these routes over here. First, it checks to see if it finds a physical file under that directory. If it doesn't match, then it comes here and says, ooh, it must not match now. Let me try this. It matches this particular URL, which indeed we retrieve data from the server. Make sense? There is no way for Express to distinguish that whether you're asking for a physical file in the file system or you're asking for data, right? As far as the server is concerned, all routes are equal. Okay? So it goes on and see the one that first matches. Okay? So if you put here an API directory, right, and put maybe in there an assignments directory, and then maybe under there another users directory, this URL would have been ambiguous, right? It says, do you mean the directory called /API assignment user, or do you mean this URL that you want to retrieve data? Understand? Right. So to disambiguate, right, and what we do is that we prepend here a tag or a string, right, a part of the path that we can all agree, right, that we're not going to create a directory called API, right? That we understand that all URLs that start with /API, they're not going to be retrieving a static content, right? We understand that these are APIs that are URLs that are meant for returning dynamic data, not static content. Make sense? Right? But it's all a convention, right? It's not part of the framework. It's not part of anything magical, right? It's that we all agree on that. Another common namespace used in industry is also put a /rest in front over here. That's also very, very common. Again, your team, whatever team you're going to be working on, will agree on a particular naming convention. Okay? But those two are very, very common. I additionally added this assignment in front of it, only because I want to be able to distinguish assignments from projects, right? URLs that this server is going to be hosting at least two applications, right? One is the assignment that we're all going to be working together, and the other one might be a project, right? The actual project you guys are working on, right? Some of you have decided that instead of hosting both the assignment and the project here on the same server, some of you have decided to host the project elsewhere in a separate Heroku instance, which is totally fine, right? That actually would prefer that if you have it hosted in a separate Heroku instance. I think it would simplify a couple of things for you. Later on tonight, I'm going to further add a couple of things here. I'm gonna distinguish these URLs with undergrads, and or grads. Okay, but I'll do that tonight. So anyway, what we're really trying to the actual data that we're interested here is user, right? That is the actual piece of data that we're asking for, right? Whether a particular user or a list of users, right? So that is the data model or the data type that we're exposing to the rest of the world, right? A list of users or a particular user, right? So the RESTful name convention is that if you want a particular instance of a collection of objects, you would specify in the path, right, using a primary key. In our case, user ID is our primary key, right? So now that we are going to create a brand new user, the naming convention is to use again the entity that we are manipulating, user, right? So this is a collection of entities that we're creating, and notice that this is a user that doesn't exist, right? So we have no ID. There is no primary key to create here, and because we're creating a brand new instance, we use post. Again, those are the two conventions, right? We first name the actual object that we are the entity that we are manipulating, and then we use post to create that instance. So post takes two arguments. The first argument is the URL to the resource on the server that you're referring to. The second argument is data. Okay, the data you want to pass along, and the data that we're passing along is the user object, which up to this point the only thing that it has in there is a username and password. Those are the only two things in there. Okay. Now this data is going to be passed onto the server, right, embedded in the HTTP body, right, that is streamed from the browser over to the server, right. The server is going to have to extract the data back from the HTTP body. Okay. Here we were passing data encoded as the part of the query. See that? Right. We can pass it as part of the query. But if you have a lot of data, or if it's data that you want to secure and perhaps hash it or secure it or make it encrypted somehow, a better solution is to use the body, right? To encode it inside of the body, and this is how you encode data as part of the HTTP body as opposed to part of the URL. Make sense? Also, because the URL, depending on the browser you're using, has a limitation on how big that URL can be, right? So it could be that it's only 128 characters or 256 characters, and if you have very long URLs, it'll truncate the URL, right? So it's not a good idea to use URLs for lots and lots of data. It's better to send it over as the body. Everybody okay? All right. All right, so this sends the data over to the server. So on the server side, we need to be able to catch the data, right? We need to be able to receive the data on the other side. If we just try this out, right, and we try to post it, and we click on register, notice that we have a 404. It says that, yes, I just created a post. But that URL is not found on the server. So that route on the server has not been registered. Okay, so we need to go over to the server and register that route. Let's do that. Let's grab it right there. Let's move on to the server side. So this is the user service server. There it is. So we're going to listen for an incoming post, right, at this particular endpoint. Right, that's what the client is sending it to, and we're going to call create user on this side. Right. Notice that I am following the naming convention that these functions on the server side match the functions on the client side. I'm only doing it for, to keep it straight in my head, right? That this function on the client side matches this function on the server. They don't have to match, right? They're completely independent. The only interaction between the client and the server is this URL. That's the only connection between these two worlds, right? So yeah, so here's create server. Let's create user, sorry. So we have function create user. So create user is going to be receiving the HTTP connection from the client on the server side. Make sense? Okay. So here we're going to say we're going to just respond saying send back a got the user. Okay. Or just return something like create user, just to know that we got here. Okay. So let's restart the server. Let's come back here. Let's refresh and send something. Okay. This time around, notice that it did not complain. Right. Notice it's not red. There's a 200. Okay. And it came back with a create user. Right. So this is a response from the server saying, "Yep, I got it. Right. I'm alive." But what we really want to be able to do is extract the data that we're sending over to the server. Right. In the body, we can see the data that we're sending over. If you go down all the way to the bottom, see that request payload. This request payload is the actual JSON object that is being encoded as part of the HTTP body that's being sent over. So you can see exactly what the client is sending, right? The username and password. On the server side, we can grab this data from the HTTP body. To do that, we can grab the user from the request.body, right? And then we can either console log the user object, right, to see what we got from the client, or we can just echo it back to the client, right, just to see the client sees, ooh, yes, that's exactly what I sent you, right? So it's echoing. So let's restart this. Let's go back. Let's refresh. We'll send it back, and so this is what we sent, EWQ, and the preview, notice that nothing is coming back, right? On the client, notice that we are trying to print this user object right here, but it's saying undefined, right? It's undefined, right? And the reason this is happening is that node express, which is the library we're using to handle all these URLs and register all these URLs and whatnot, right, doesn't know how to parse the body, right, out of the box. Notice that it knows how to parse path parameters. It knows how to parse path parameters from the URL. It knows how to parse query strings, okay, from the query, right? So some things it knows how to parse, not everything, okay? Just because there's just a plethora of things that the client can send over, right? It could send a whole file. It could send something, a form that you fill out, right? It can send all sorts of things, all different MIME types, okay? Of which JSON is just one of them, all right? So out of the box, Express doesn't know how to parse a body, all right? We need to configure it with a body parsing library, all right? So let's see how we do that. If we go to the Express website, and we go to the API reference, and here you search for body parser. It gives you a little bit of documentation on how to parse JSON that the client is sending over that is encoded using this MIME type. This is what the client is sending, right? JSON encoded using this MIME type, application JSON, right? So you can configure this body parser to parse data of that MIME type. Right, so to do that, we're going to use the body parser library. So we're going to have to install this parser. So to do that, we can go to the terminal and do npm np. Can you make this bigger? No. Npm install body parser -- save. Don't forget to do a -- save. Okay. Otherwise, if you don't put the -- save, this will work locally on your local system, but when you deploy it to Heroku, it won't work because it won't know that it needs to install that library. Yes? And I always get the same question every semester. Why is it working locally, but it's not working remotely? Right? And you'll get the same answer. You probably forgot the -- save. Okay? So this is going to install bodyparser library, and it's going to make an entry. That save here, -save, is going to make an entry into the package JSON, right? And it's going to declare bodyparser as a dependency for this project. Yes?
So I know when we did this, like we have a different version. Like, we have a different version.
Oh, I do? Okay.
So does it? You don't care, right?
So it'll automatically choose the right version depending on the correct node.js.
Yeah, but like, so the one when you told me we wrote in the dependencies, like it's bodyparser like 1.15. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, that's fine. Yep. Okay. So this is what Heroku is going to do is going to do an npm install, right? When you deploy brand new, and it'll deploy all these dependencies. But if you're missing that dependency, it won't install bodyparser. Okay, so you've installed it locally, but not remotely. All right. So now we have it installed. Let's go back to the to here. What do we need to do? We need to load it. We need to load it from our server JS. So let's go to our server JS and declare load the parser library. There it is. And now we need to configure a couple of things. We need to say that we're parsing the JSON of this MIME type and parsing it from the body. All right. So let's grab those two things, and paste them. Here's fine. Okay? Everybody okay? All right, so let's restart our server. Let's restart our server, and let's try that again. Let's go back to register. Let's refresh. Click on register, and we click on user. And notice that, indeed, this is the data that's coming back from the server. It's echoing, right, the data that we sent, right? And also, if we look at the console, indeed, the server is getting the correct object that we just sent over. Yes, and everything matches. Right? If you look at the headers of what we sent over, that's the data we got, and the server just echoed back the data that we sent it. Right? So the server was able to extract the data from the body. Everybody okay? All right. So we have that. So on the server, the only thing left to do really is to push this user onto the array that already exists. All right, so let's do that. So okay, we got that. Let's remove that. We're going to first add the ID. We were doing this on the client side, right, using date and timestamp and whatnot. We can move this over to the server as well. So a new date. Get time. Okay, and then we're going to push it into our user array. So users.push, and then the user object. Okay, so now it belongs to this collection of users, and we're sending it over as a response back to the client. Make sense? All right. All right. So let's restart. So that's pretty much going to work. What happens on the client side, though, right? We sent that over to the server. On the server side, on the client side, once we send it over, this post, right? What we want to be able to do, notice that, is to do what? Let's see. This pushes it to the array, and then what does the controller do? The controller did this, right? Oh no, wait. Here's the create, right? Creates the user. Oh, and then it used the user ID, right? It used the user ID that it created locally, right, to then navigate to the profile, right? But we don't have that ID, right? That ID is being created on the server side. We don't have that locally here. So what we need to do is wait for that user to come back from the server, right? So that we know that that user indeed has made it into the collection, and that new user object has that ID, right? We didn't create it here on the client. We're going to create it on the server. Yes? Right? So to do that, to be able to send over and then retrieve that user back, we need to do it from the create user here. We need to return, yes, we need to return this. And this is, we're going to return what? A promise, right? Remember we did this yesterday? It's going to return a promise, but it's going to return whatever the server's returning, the user object, but wrapped instead of a promise, wrapped instead of a response. Yes? Okay? So just to make it convenient for the controller, we're going to handle the promise right here. Okay, we're going to handle the promise. This is the raw response that is coming from the server. We're going to unwrap it and return the response.data. Right? So that's going to be the actual user with the brand new underscore ID generated from the server. Correct? On the controller side, we're going to this is no longer going to be synchronous, right? Now it's going to be asynchronous. We're going to listen for the incoming request, right? And here's the actual user, the brand new user with the underscore ID, right? With the primary key. And now that we have that, now we can do the location URL with the user ID. Make sense? Everybody okay? Right, in the callback. All right, so let's try this out. Let's restart the server. Okay, and let's go back. Let's register, and let's try just a couple. Q1. We register, and indeed, you see, we navigated to this user with that brand new ID that was generated from the server. Make sense? If I log out and I go to Bob and Bob, I have Bob's information, right, with 234. But if I log in as Q1 and Q1, right, notice that indeed I have the information for Q1. Make sense? Right? And even if I refresh the page, the information is still there. Right? Remember that issue used to go away, right? Because all the data was being hosted on the client side. It's no longer being hosted on the client side, right? All this is being hosted on the server. If I restart the server, though, and I refresh the page, notice that there is no information anymore, right? Because all that is being stored in a variable that is in the RAM, right? A memory space of the server, right? As long as the server is up and running, it has reference to that array. Once you refresh the server, it all goes away. So next week we're going to focus on making that permanent, right? Storing it in the database where it belongs. Okay. But for now, we're going to just keep it in the memory space of the server. Everybody okay? All right. Okay, so we can create a user. Next, what we want to be able to do is be able to modify or update an existing instance.